Moving back to South Asia is one of the least integrated regions in the world.
Yes.
A much lamented statistic
Yes.
is that trade in the region, inter-regional trade,
Right.
is only about 5%.
Right.
You are in a region where the ASEAN
Yes.
is a dynamic regional
Yeah,
bloc,
yeah.
both politically and economically. Where do you see South Asia going wrong, and what's really holding back regional integration in South Asia?
I think in one word, politics perhaps. If you look at just say Indo-Pakistan trade, I mean, I'm told that it's in the region of 2 billion a year, which is actually quite pathetic. Now, why isn't there more trade? I think the main problem is this relationship that stems from mutual suspicion and a long history of animosity. And once that is in place, and in the case of Pakistan, an army that puts India as enemy number one or two, depending on when you speak to them and who you ask, to just develop closer relationship in terms of trade is something that's very difficult to do. Having said that, I think there is now, one sees a certain development of wanting to create better conditions for trade, so most favored nation kind of provisions. If you look at China and India, India and China, you see that despite the difficulties of relationship in certain areas, borders and Tibet, trade has been doing very well, 60 billion a year. Now, people say moving towards 100 billion. Now, if the same could happen, say, between India and Pakistan, between India and Sri Lanka, between India and Bangladesh, I think the whole region is going to set to grow very significantly. It's just, I think, the difficulties of relationship between governments, even in Sri Lanka, despite warming relationship in the last few years, there are still all these nitty-gritty about fishermen and issues on the streets, and then this Tamil population in Tamil Nadu putting pressure on the government to do certain things right. So it's not a smooth passage, and that vision of regional growth, I think, has not been embraced by all. Whereas in ASEAN, it's been quite different. I think from very early on, maybe in the 70s, I think they realized that, ASEAN was not meant to be a military pact, but as a region of 600 million people, if there are better opportunities for trade, markets are more open, I think it benefits everybody. But of course, there are different levels of development in ASEAN, and this is something that is still being worked out. But I think at least there isn't that kind of problem. So occasionally you have a problem between, say, Thailand and Cambodia, but I think most of this are now being ironed out, and there is a kind of desire on the part of all ASEAN countries to work together. And you remember at one time, there was a lot of pressure on ASEAN to ostracize Myanmar, but the ASEAN approach has been, well, Myanmar is a member of the family. It may be wayward, but we have to deal with it as a member of the family. You don't ostracize. But I think that same culture or the same kind of feeling is not there in South Asia. And I think unless that's worked out, in intra-South Asian trade and economic relations will not take off.
Moving a little closer to home, finally. You are here with chairman of your institute,
Right.
Institute for South Asian Studies. You in fact signed a MOU
Right.
with the IPS,
Yes.
and you've been meeting with other think tanks,
Right.
research
Yeah.
institutes here. From that interaction, what would you take away from this visit on Sri Lanka's prospects, Sri Lanka's association with South Asia and with your region, East Asia? Where do you see Sri Lanka placed, and what's your take on our prospects?
Okay, we came here with the objective of linking up with individuals like yourself, with think tanks and research institutes, because you guys do so much work and have so much deep knowledge of the country that you are in and you study, and we think that we can learn a lot from you. Now, we are based in Singapore, as you know. We study South Asia, so we are looking at South Asia from outside South Asia. And there are advantages and disadvantages. The advantage, of course, is that we can observe a certain degree of neutrality and objectivity because we are not in the heat of the action. But at the same time, we won't have that kind of insights that you would have studying the country here. So we are here to learn from all of you. Now, we're also very interested to know where Sri Lanka is headed in a post-war era. I mean, here now you have an opportunity to put all these 30 years of civil strife behind you, stabilize the politics, and then take off perhaps economically, and also to build a Sri Lanka that in the 50s was held as a model for a lot of us in Southeast Asia. So that's what we want to understand. And also Sri Lanka is a multi-religious, multicultural, multi-ethnic society. Of course, there are now some issues and some strains, and you will probably have to work at overcoming it. And we want to understand all these issues. So what are my takeaways? I think as I speak to a lot of people, what I was most impressed with are the young people I've met. Because there's a lot of passion, there's a lot of desire of a group of people who are very interested to do that kind. I was just commenting to my chairman that the civil social awareness among this group of young people is quite impressive. They are interested, understand the problem, to do the research, to study the issues, and then to try to take this forward and try to find resolutions, constructive resolutions to a lot of these issues. And that to me is very impressive, and when the young of a country does that, it all goes well. But having said all these things, I also understand that there are challenges. I understand that the economy, while it's doing well now, 7-8% growth, needs to make quite strong structural changes for it to continue moving forward. Now, whether it's a balance of private, public sector roles and the relative parts that they play in the economy, whether it's a part of, I think, the state restructuring itself, whether it's a case of education, building more social infrastructure. I think these are issues that will be tackled on and on. But there are a number of fundamental things that will need to be done. The immediate ones, of course, national reconciliation, and then putting in the kinds of fundamentals for sustained economic growth. So I think I've heard the need for education, for trained manpower, human resource development, schools, universities. I think all these will have to be put in place. So in a nutshell, a lot of promise going forward. The signs are good that young people are interested, but there are also challenges that need to be faced in the short and medium term.
I can't help but ask one last question. Sri Lanka is taking a look east approach.
Yeah.
And much of the rhetoric among our policymakers and politicians is that we want to become the next Singapore. Very simple question. Do you think Sri Lanka should in fact be looking at Singapore, or maybe other countries in the region, like Malaysia, for instance?
I've always been very skeptical about countries wanting to emulate themselves on one particular model. And Singapore has in the past been guilty of this many times. You know, we've wanted to be the Boston of the East, we wanted to be like Sri Lanka and all this. In the end, you've got to sort of adopt best practices that suit your cultural and your social context. There isn't one set of policies, there isn't one model that will suit your particular sets of conditions. And I think if I were to say what would I think would be the best approach, I would say pragmatism. Take what works for you, take what will be useful for your cultural, social, political context. But I think there has to be a political will to want to move in those directions. And I think if there was one lesson that I say Singapore could perhaps share, and that is precisely this. I think the early leadership of Singapore, Lee Kuan Yew and his cabinet, they looked around. They took what's best from Japan, they took what's best from America, they took what's best from Europe. We had a colonial legacy like you have. We maintain English. There are lots of English institutions that we still have in our system today. Then we had to learn Chinese because of a growing China, you see, and ensure that the Chinese population don't lose their cultural sort of bearings, you see. And then we have to learn from America in terms of higher education. Why are American universities so successful? Innovation, creativity. So these are things that we have to borrow bits and pieces and then try to make something that works for our system. And that would be the same thing I'll say for Sri Lanka as well.
Thank you very much, Professor, for taking the time. We hope you enjoyed your visit to Sri Lanka and hope to see you again soon. Thank you for joining us on Talking Economics.
Thank you for having me.
Brilliant.
That was okay?
Yeah.